Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. My neighborhood in suburban Houston has always thrown a block party for New Year's Eve, one of those traditions that started before anyone can remember exactly when. Cypress Glen Drive turns into this makeshift festival every December 31st, with families dragging out folding tables, coolers packed with beer and soda, and someone always hooks up speakers to blast music from their garage. At 34, having lived on this street since my divorce 3 years prior, I had seen my share of these gatherings. Most years they went smoothly enough, kids running around with sparklers, adults getting progressively louder as midnight approached, the occasional Roman candle lighting up the sky. The party in 2018 started exactly like all the others. My daughter Mackenzie was staying with her father that week, so I walked down alone around 9, carrying a tray of deviled eggs nobody would eat, and a bottle of wine I fully intended to finish myself. The air smelled like charcoal and sulfur already, that familiar combination of backyard grilling and early fireworks that somehow always made me feel nostalgic. The Castillo family had set up their usual spot 3 houses down from mine, their driveway transformed into a small-scale carnival with string lights and a bounce house for the younger kids. Roberto Castillo, a broad-shouldered contractor in his 50s who had lived on the street longer than anyone, was manning the grill like he did every year. His wife Elena handed me a paper plate loaded with carne asada before I could even say hello. The crowd was typical for our block, maybe 60 or 70 people spread across 3 or 4 connected driveways. Some faces I recognized from years of these parties, others belonging to relatives or friends visiting for the holiday. I found a spot near the Nguyens garage where a group of women around my age had gathered with lawn chairs and wine glasses. We talked about nothing important, work complaints, holiday travel disasters, whose kids were doing what. Across the street, I noticed a cluster of younger guys, maybe early 20s, gathered around a pickup truck I did not recognize. They were loud, already drunk from the way they swayed and laughed at everything. One of them kept opening the truck bed and rummaging through something, but from where I sat, I could not see what they had back there. Around 10:30, the fireworks started picking up. Nothing unusual at first. Bottle rockets, sparklers, those little tanks that roll across the pavement shooting sparks. A few of the dads had pooled money for a proper fireworks display, the kind you buy from those pop-up tents along the highway, and they were setting them up in the middle of the cul-de-sac where the pavement widened. Roberto walked over to supervise, making sure they positioned the mortars correctly in their tubes. I remember thinking how careful they were being, angling everything away from the houses and cars, keeping the kids back behind an invisible line everyone seemed to understand. The first few big ones went up beautifully, exploding in red and gold bursts that made everyone cheer. The children screamed with delight, covering their ears between explosions. For maybe 20 minutes, everything was exactly what a neighborhood celebration should be. Loud, joyful, a little chaotic, but in a controlled way. Then I noticed the guys from the pickup truck had started setting off their own fireworks on the opposite end of the street, near where the cul-de-sac narrowed back into a regular road. Their setup was nothing like what the dads had organized. They were lighting things directly off the asphalt, no tubes or stands, just placing them on the ground and running back laughing. The fireworks they had were bigger than anything I had seen at a block party before. These massive cylindrical things that looked industrial, like something you would see at a professional show. One of the women next to me, a nurse named Gloria who lived 2 doors down from me, squinted at them and said something about how those did not look legal. I shrugged it off at the time, figuring young guys always wanted to show off with bigger explosions. The first few they lit went up fine, though they climbed higher and exploded louder than the ones our neighbors were using. Car alarms started going off down the street from the concussive force. Few of the older residents shot annoyed looks in their direction, but nobody said anything. It was New Year's Eve, after all, and everyone was several drinks deep into tolerating things they normally would not. I watched one of them, a skinny guy with a shaved head and a Dallas Cowboys jersey, pull out something from the truck bed that was easily 3 feet tall. Even from 50 yards away, I could tell it was different from the others. It had a wider base and what looked like multiple tubes fused together at odd angles. Roberto must have noticed too, because he started walking toward them, wiping his hands on his jeans like he always did when he was about to handle something unpleasant. I could not hear what he said, but I saw him gesturing at the device, pointing back toward the main group, clearly trying to convince them to move their operation somewhere safer or maybe just stop altogether. The skinny guy in the Cowboys jersey laughed and clapped Roberto on the shoulder like they were old friends, though I knew for certain Roberto had never seen these people before tonight. Another one of them, a heavier guy with a thick beard and a camouflage jacket, stepped between Roberto and the firework and said something that made the whole group crack up. Roberto stood there for a moment, hands on his hips, then shook his head and walked back toward us. When he passed by the Nguyen's driveway, I heard him mutter something in Spanish to Elena, and her face went tight with worry. She started gathering the smaller children, guiding them toward the Castillo's backyard where the bounce house was, away from the street. I should have paid more attention to that. I should have followed her lead. Instead, I stayed in my lawn chair with my wine, watching the countdown on someone's phone screen, listening to the collective excitement building as we approached midnight. The street was packed now, everyone drifting toward the center for the final minute of the year. Kids sat on their fathers' shoulders, couples wrapped arms around each other. Someone had brought out champagne bottles, and I could hear corks popping prematurely, people too eager to wait. The official fireworks crew was preparing their grand finale, a row of 6 mortars lined up in perfect sequence. Across the way, the guys from the pickup were huddled around their massive device, and I saw the flash of a lighter in the darkness. The skinny one was crouched down, doing something to the base of it, and I realized with a sudden clarity that he was not just lighting a fuse, he was adjusting something, tilting the whole apparatus at an angle that pointed not up toward the sky but sideways, almost parallel to the ground. My brain processed this information slowly, sluggishly, dulled by alcohol and the assumption that nobody would be that reckless. The bearded guy was filming on his phone, backing away with that anticipatory grin people get when they know something explosive is about to happen. The countdown reached 10, and everyone around me started chanting. 9, 8, 7. I stood up from my chair, my mouth opening to say something, though I had no idea what. The first projectile launched at the count of 3, and it did not go up. It screamed sideways across the street at chest height, trailing orange sparks and smoke, and slammed into the side of a silver minivan parked in the Nguyen's driveway. The explosion was nothing like the pretty bursts in the sky. It was a violent, concussive crack that rattled windows and set off every car alarm within 100 feet. For a split second, nobody moved. The chanting stopped mid-number, replaced by this horrible ringing silence where everyone's brain tried to catch up with what their eyes had just seen. Then the second tube fired, and this one went lower, skipping off the pavement like a stone on water before detonating against someone's recycling bin and sending shards of blue plastic in every direction. The screaming started then, that primal sound of genuine terror that you never forget once you hear it. People scattered in every direction, stumbling over lawn chairs and coolers, shoving past each other in blind panic. I saw a teenager go down hard, tripped by someone rushing past him, and 2 more people fell over his body before anyone thought to help him up. The third projectile caught a man in the shoulder. I later learned his name was Douglas Park, a retired postal worker who lived at the end of the street, and the impact spun him around like a top before he crumpled to the ground. The device kept firing, one tube after another, each projectile launching at a different angle as if the whole thing had been designed to spray destruction in a wide arc. I do not remember making the decision to run, but suddenly I was moving, crouched low like I had seen people do in movies about war zones, trying to get behind something solid. A rocket whistled past close enough that I felt the heat on my face and smelled burning chemicals. That acrid stench of gunpowder mixed with something sharper, more toxic. I dove behind a pickup truck, not the one belonging to those guys, a different one, dark blue belonging to the Mukherjees 3 houses down, and pressed myself against the tire as explosions continued to crack and boom around me. Through the gap beneath the truck, I could see feet running past, some in sneakers, some barefoot. One pair leaving dark wet prints on the concrete that I prayed was spilled wine but knew was not. Someone was screaming a name over and over, Tammy, 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 and the desperation in that voice made my throat close up. I could hear children crying somewhere nearby, that high-pitched wail of terror that bypasses your rational brain and hits something ancient and protective. Glass shattered, a car window or maybe a house window, I could not tell, and someone shouted to call 911, though by then I was certain half the neighborhood was already dialing. The firing stopped as suddenly as it started, maybe 45 seconds total, though it felt like an hour. I stayed pressed against that tire for another minute, afraid to move, listening to the aftermath unfold around me. Car alarms blaring in discordant layers, people sobbing, moaning, calling out for family members. The sharp smell of smoke mixing with the sulfur stench that now seemed poisonous rather than festive. When I finally crawled out from behind the truck, the street looked like footage from a disaster zone. The silver minivan had a hole punched through its sliding door. The metal peeled back like something had bitten through it. Lawn chairs were scattered and overturned, coolers dumped on their sides with ice and cans spilling across driveways. I saw a woman sitting on the curb holding a bloody towel to another woman's head, both of them shaking so hard, the towel kept slipping. Roberto was already at Douglas Park's side, pressing his hands against the man's shoulder while Elena screamed into her phone at a 911 dispatcher. The retired postal worker was conscious but pale, his lips moving without sound, his eyes fixed on the sky like he was watching something the rest of us could not see. A dark stain spread beneath him, soaking into the concrete, and I had to look away before my legs gave out. The guys from the pickup truck were gone. I do not know exactly when they left, during the chaos or immediately after. But when I looked toward where they had been standing, the space was empty. Tire marks on the grass showed where they had peeled out, cutting across the Hoffman's lawn to avoid the crowd blocking the street. Someone said they saw the truck heading toward the highway, but in the darkness and confusion, nobody had thought to get a license plate. The device they left behind was still smoking. This twisted metal thing that looked like it had been welded together in someone's garage, amateur and malicious. Later, the police would tell us it was a homemade multi-shot mortar, modified to fire horizontally rather than vertically, the kind of thing people built to cause maximum damage. They found traces of accelerant packed around the charges, designed to make the explosions bigger, hotter, more destructive. These were not idiots who made a mistake. They had come to our street deliberately, targeted a crowd of families celebrating the new year, and created something specifically intended to hurt people. The investigator who interviewed me used the word domestic terrorism, and then quickly corrected himself, said they were still determining motive, but I saw his face and I knew what he was thinking. 7 people went to the hospital that night. Douglas Park was the worst. He lost partial use of his left arm and spent 3 weeks in recovery before he could come home. A 14-year-old girl named Avery suffered burns on her legs from a projectile that detonated near her feet. The woman I saw on the curb with the head wound needed 12 stitches. Others had cuts from flying debris, bruises from falling or being trampled. One man broke his wrist trying to shield his daughter from the chaos. The physical injuries healed more or less over the following months. What did not heal was the feeling of safety that our street had always provided. The Castillos stopped hosting the block party after that year, and nobody blamed them. Several families put their houses on the market by spring, including the Nguyens, whose minivan had been totaled and whose youngest son started having nightmares so severe they had to put him in therapy. I thought about leaving too, scrolled through real estate listings late at night when I could not sleep, imagined starting over somewhere without memories of smoke and screaming embedded in every corner. But I had lived on Cypress Glen Drive for 6 years by then, and something stubborn in me Refused to let strangers with a homemade bomb take that away from me. They never caught the guys who did it. The police followed leads for months. Surveillance footage from a gas station showed the pickup truck, but the plates were obscured with mud, probably intentionally. Someone on a neighborhood app claimed to recognize the skinny guy in the Cowboys jersey. Said he was a friend of a friend from a town 40 miles west, but it never led anywhere concrete. The working theory was that they had chosen our street randomly, just a target of opportunity. A crowd of people gathered in one place where they could test their creation and disappear into the new year. Maybe they wanted to see what their device could do. Maybe they hated something about our neighborhood, our families, our celebration. Maybe they were just the kind of people who find pleasure in chaos and suffering, and happened to pick us that night. I still do not know, and 6 years later, I have accepted that I probably never will. What I do know is that I flinch at every firework now, even the small ones, even the legal sparklers my daughter waves around on the 4th of July. I know that Roberto Castillo still walks with a slight limp from where he twisted his knee running toward Douglas Park that night. I know that somewhere out there, 3 or 4 young men are living their lives, maybe telling the story at parties like it was some wild adventure, never once thinking about the 14-year-old girl with scars on her legs, or the little boy who cannot sleep without a light on. And I know that every December 31st when midnight approaches and the sky starts to light up, I am inside my house with the curtains drawn, waiting for the new year to begin in silence. Every time someone pops a champagne bottle near me, I flinch. My wife thinks it is a quirk, something she teases me about at weddings and birthday parties, but she does not know where it comes from. She does not know about Corey, about that house in Tucson, about the longest 6 hours of my life. Corey and I met during a summer internship at an architecture firm right after I finished college. He was funny, easygoing, the type of guy who made everyone feel comfortable in a room. We stayed in touch over the years, grabbing beers when our schedules aligned, texting each other memes at 2 in the morning. When he bought his first house and invited me to his New Year's Eve party, I did not think twice. I drove down from Phoenix on a Wednesday afternoon, windows down, radio blasting, genuinely excited to see my old friend. If someone had told me what was waiting at the end of that night, I would have turned my car around and never looked back. The party started around 9, and by 10 the house was packed with people I had never met. Corey introduced me to a few of his co-workers, a couple of neighbors, and his girlfriend Vivian, a soft-spoken woman with kind eyes who worked as a nurse. The living room smelled like cinnamon candles and cheap beer, and someone had taped a hand-drawn banner above the television that read, "New Year, New Us," in glittery letters. I spent most of the night hovering near the snack table, making small talk with strangers, and watching the clock inch toward midnight. When the countdown finally hit 0, everyone cheered and hugged, and I remember thinking this was exactly the kind of night I needed. Simple, warm, surrounded by good energy. By 1 in the morning, most guests had called their Ubers. By 2:30, only 3 of us remained. Me, Corey, and a guy named Trent, who passed out on the couch with his shoes still on. Vivian kissed Corey goodbye around that time, saying she had to be at the hospital by 6. I told Corey I would help him clean up before heading to my hotel. He thanked me, handed me a garbage bag, and locked the front door behind Vivian. I did not think anything of it at the time. We worked in comfortable silence for a while, tossing cups and napkins into trash bags, wiping down the kitchen counter, stacking dirty plates in the sink. Trent was snoring on the couch, dead to the world, and Corey joked that we should draw something on his face with a marker. I laughed and told him that was cruel, and he shrugged with that familiar grin of his. Around 3:30, I started feeling the exhaustion hit me. My eyes were heavy, my legs ached from standing all night, and the alcohol had worn off enough that I just wanted to crash at my hotel. I told Corey I was going to head out, that we had made good progress and he could finish the rest in the morning. He was in the kitchen at the time, his back to me, rinsing a glass under the faucet. He did not respond right away. The water kept running, and I stood there waiting, thinking maybe he had not heard me. Then he turned off the faucet, set the glass down slowly, and turned to face me with an expression I had never seen on him before. His eyes were flat, empty, like someone had switched off a light behind them. He asked me why I was in such a hurry to leave. His voice was calm, but there was something underneath it, something tight and coiled. I told him I was just tired, that I had a long drive back to Phoenix in the morning and wanted to get some sleep. He nodded slowly, wiping his hands on a dish towel, but he did not move from where he was standing. The kitchen suddenly felt smaller than it had all night. He asked me if I remembered a party we went to back in college, some house party near campus where a bunch of us got too drunk and made fools of ourselves. I said yeah, vaguely, not really sure where he was going with this. He told me that night had changed everything for him, that something happened and I was part of it. I had no idea what he was talking about. I told him I did not remember anything unusual, that it was just another college party. He stared at me for a long moment, then let out this short, bitter laugh that made the hair on my arms stand up. He said I was lying. He said I had always been a liar. I tried to keep my voice steady, told him I genuinely had no clue what he was referring to, that maybe he was confusing me with someone else or misremembering something. He shook his head, slow and deliberate, like a teacher disappointed in a student who keeps giving the wrong answer. He said he had been waiting years to have this conversation, that he had replayed that night in his head 1,000 times, and he knew exactly what happened. According to him, I had humiliated him in front of a girl he liked, said something cruel that made her laugh at him, and ruined his chance with her forever. I racked my brain trying to recall anything like that, any moment where I might have crossed a line, but I came up empty. College was a blur of classes and parties and late nights. I could barely remember what I ate for dinner last week, let alone some random interaction from over a decade ago. I told him that even if something like that did happen, I was sorry, that I never meant to hurt him. He tilted his head slightly, studying my face like he was searching for something. Then he told me my apology meant nothing. That sorry was just a word people used when they got caught. I glanced toward the living room, hoping Trent might have woken up, but he was still sprawled on the couch, dead asleep. The house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the walls settling in the cold desert night. I told Corey I was going to leave, that we could talk about this some other time when we were both rested and sober. I took a step toward the front door and he moved with me, positioning himself between me and the hallway. It was subtle, almost casual, but deliberate enough that I noticed. My keys were in my jacket pocket, and my jacket was hanging on a hook by the front door, behind him. He asked me where I thought I was going. His tone had shifted again, lighter now, almost playful, but there was no warmth in it. I told him I was leaving, that this conversation was getting weird, and I did not want to say something I would regret. He smiled then, but it was the kind of smile that does not reach the eyes, the kind that makes you realize you have been reading someone wrong for a very long time. He told me to sit down, that we were not finished talking. I said no. I said I was done with this conversation and I started walking toward the hallway anyway. He grabbed my arm, not hard but firm enough to stop me in my tracks. His grip was steady, controlled, like he had practiced this moment. I pulled away and told him not to touch me, and something flickered across his face, a flash of anger that disappeared as quickly as it came. He raised both hands in mock surrender, took a step back, and told me I was free to leave whenever I wanted. But then he added that it would be a shame if something happened to my car. I asked him what that meant. He shrugged and said the neighborhood could be rough at night, that people got their tires slashed all the time, windows smashed, that kind of thing. He said it so casually, like he was commenting on the weather. I realized then that this was not a drunk friend being emotional. This was something else entirely. He had planned this, waited for the house to empty, waited for Vivian to leave, waited until it was just the two of us and a guy unconscious on the couch who would not wake up if the ceiling collapsed. I tried to stay calm, tried to think clearly. My phone was in my back pocket and I considered calling someone, But who would I call at 4 in the morning? The police? And tell them what? That my friend was being weird and would not let me leave? I did not even know if that was a crime. Corey watched me like he could see the calculations running through my head, and he seemed amused by it. He walked past me into the living room, stepping over Trent's legs, and sat down in an armchair facing the front door. He picked up a half-empty bottle of whiskey from the coffee table and took a long sip, never breaking eye contact with me. He told me to relax, that I was acting like he was some kind of monster. He said all he wanted was for me to admit what I did, to acknowledge the pain I caused him, and then I could go. His voice had that reasonable tone again, the voice of someone who believes they are being perfectly fair. But I had nothing to admit. Whatever happened at that party, if anything happened at all, was buried so deep in my memory that it might as well have never existed. And I was starting to suspect that was the point, that maybe this was never about the truth. Maybe it was about something broken inside him that I could not fix no matter what I said. The next 2 hours were the longest of my life. Corey talked and talked, circling back to the same accusations, the same story about that college party, adding new details each time like he was building a case against me in real time. Sometimes he was calm, almost philosophical, musing about how people wear masks and hide their true selves. Other times his voice would spike with anger, and he would lean forward in that armchair like he was about to launch himself at me. I stayed standing near the kitchen doorway, afraid to sit down, afraid to move closer to him or further away. Trent shifted once around 5 in the morning, mumbled something in his sleep, and I nearly shouted his name to wake him up. But Corey shot me a look that stopped me cold, a warning, clear as glass. He told me that Trent had taken some pills earlier, something to help him sleep, and he would not be waking up for a while. The way he said it made me wonder if Corey had given them to him on purpose, slipped something into his drink. I had no proof, but the thought lodged itself in my brain and would not leave. Around 6 in the morning, pale light started creeping through the blinds. I could hear birds outside, the distant sound of a car engine starting somewhere down the street. The world was waking up, and I was still trapped in that living room with a man I no longer recognized. Corey had grown quieter over the past hour, staring at me with this unsettling patience, like he had all the time in the world. I told him that people would start wondering where I was, that I was supposed to check out of my hotel by 11, that my girlfriend expected me to call her in the morning. He asked me if I was threatening him. I said no, I was just stating facts. He stood up slowly, set the whiskey bottle down on the coffee table, and walked toward me. My whole body tensed. He stopped about 2 feet away, close enough that I could smell the alcohol on his breath, and he told me that I had ruined his life once before, and he was not going to let me do it again. His voice cracked when he said it, and for a split second I saw something underneath all that anger, something raw, something wounded, but I could not afford to feel sorry for him. Not when he was standing between me and the door, not when I did not know what he was capable of doing next. What saved me was Trent. At around 6:30, he finally stirred on the couch, groaning and rubbing his eyes like a man clawing his way out of a coma. Corey turned his head toward the sound just for a second, and in that moment I made my decision. I moved fast, faster than I knew I could, shoving past him and grabbing my jacket from the hook by the door. My keys jangled in the pocket as I fumbled with the deadbolt, my fingers clumsy with adrenaline. Corey shouted something behind me, but I did not stop to listen. I yanked the door open and stumbled into the cold morning air, the desert sunrise painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. I ran to my car parked on the street, got in, locked the doors, and started the engine. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I looked back at the house and saw Corey standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the light from inside. He did not chase me. He just stood there, watching, his arms hanging loose at his sides. Trent appeared behind him a moment later, looking confused, and I pulled away from the curb before either of them could take another step. I drove straight back to Phoenix without stopping. I did not check out of my hotel. I left my bag there, clothes and toiletries I never went back for. My girlfriend asked me what happened when I got home, why I looked so pale, why I would not stop pacing around the apartment. I told her some of it, not all of it, because I did not know how to explain the parts that did not make sense even to me. I blocked Corey's number that same day. He tried reaching out a few times through mutual friends over the following months, leaving messages that ranged from apologetic to angry, but I never responded. I still do not know what really happened at that college party, if anything happened at all. Part of me wonders if he invented the whole thing, constructed a grievance out of thin air to justify something darker inside himself. I think about Trent sometimes, wonder if he ever realized what was happening that night, if Corey ever turned that same energy on him. I moved to a different city a year later, partly for work, partly because I could not shake the feeling that Corey might show up at my door one day. He never did, but every New Year's Eve, when the clock strikes midnight and the champagne corks start popping, I am back in that kitchen, watching my friend's face transform into something I did not recognize, realizing too late that some people carry wounds so deep they become weapons. My cousin Brennan threw the party that ruined everything. December 31st, 2023, at his place in Fairview Heights, Illinois, one of those suburban houses with the finished basement and the big backyard. He had just turned 40 and was going through some midlife crisis thing, wanting to prove he could still throw a rager like we did back in college. I graduated in 2015, so I was at that age where house parties felt kind of juvenile, but Brennan insisted. He posted the invite on 3 different social media platforms, which was the first mistake. The more the merrier, he kept saying when I told him that was a bad idea. By 10 that night, there were already over 100 people crammed into that house, and I swear I recognized maybe 20 of them. The music was so loud you could feel it in your chest from the driveway, and cars were parked all the way down Crescent Road, blocking driveways and fire hydrants. I remember standing in the kitchen around 11, nursing a beer I had been holding for an hour, watching strangers flow through the back door like it was some kind of nightclub. My girlfriend Paige was somewhere in the living room talking to her co-workers, and I kept checking my phone, already thinking about how we could slip out right after midnight without Brennan guilt-tripping me. The vibe was weird, you know. Not bad exactly, but there was this energy that made me uncomfortable. Too many people I did not know, too many faces that seemed to be scanning the room rather than enjoying themselves. I noticed this one group near the sliding glass door, 4 guys, maybe 5, standing in a tight circle and not really talking to anyone else. They were dressed nice enough, but something about the way they watched the crowd made my neck tense up. I told myself I was being paranoid. It was New Year's Eve. People invite their friends. Those friends invite other friends. That is how these things work. Around 11:30, I went looking for Paige because I wanted to make sure we were together for the countdown. The house was packed to the point where moving from room to room felt like pushing through a concert crowd. I found her in the living room, but she was deep in conversation with some woman I had never seen before, so I just waved and pointed toward the kitchen to let her know where I would be. On my way back, I passed the front door and saw more people coming in. A steady stream of them, actually. Brennan was nowhere near the entrance. He was probably in the basement where he had set up the DJ booth and the big screen TV for the ball drop. Nobody was checking who came in. The door was just open and people walked through like they owned the place. I saw a couple of guys come in carrying backpacks, which struck me as odd. Who brings a backpack to a house party? But again, I pushed the thought away. Maybe they had bottles, maybe they had a change of clothes for after midnight. I was making excuses for things that should have been red flags. The basement was shoulder to shoulder when I finally made my way down there at maybe 11:45. Brennan had outdone himself with the setup. Strobe lights, a fog machine, speakers that probably cost more than my car. He saw me and raised his drink, grinning like an idiot, clearly proud of the chaos he had created. I tried to smile back, but I could not shake this feeling in my gut. The basement had 2 exits. The stairs I came down, and a small door that led to the backyard through a concrete stairwell. Both were blocked by people. Not intentionally blocked, just crowded. But I remember thinking that if something happened down here, getting out would be a nightmare. I positioned myself near the stairs anyway, keeping my back to the wall. Paige texted me that she was coming down for the countdown. The DJ started hyping everyone up, telling us we had 10 minutes until the new year. 10 minutes. That is all the normal we had left. Paige found me at 11:52. I remember the exact time because I looked at my phone when she grabbed my arm. She had to yell in my ear to be heard over the music, telling me something about how she lost her purse upstairs and needed to find it before midnight. I told her to forget it, that we would look for it after the countdown, but she was already pulling away, saying she had her car keys in there and her anxiety would not let her enjoy the moment without knowing where it was. I should have gone with her. I replay that decision in my head all the time. But I just nodded and watched her disappear up the stairs, figuring she would be back in 2 minutes. The countdown on the TV screen showed 7 minutes to midnight. The crowd in the basement started getting louder, more excited. Someone popped a champagne bottle early and sprayed it everywhere, and people cheered. I felt the foam hit my neck and I wiped it off, annoyed. That is what I was focused on, champagne on my skin, while upstairs things were already starting to go wrong. The first sign that something was happening came at 5 minutes to midnight. The music cut out suddenly, mid-song, and for a second everyone in the basement just stood there in confused silence. Then there was this sound from upstairs. Not a scream exactly, more like a collective gasp followed by shouting. Brennan pushed through the crowd toward the stairs, asking what the hell was going on with his sound system. I followed him because I had this sudden, desperate need to find Paige. We got to the bottom of the stairs and there was already a bottleneck of people trying to go up, but also people trying to come down, their faces pale and panicked. Someone was yelling about a gun. I heard the word, and my brain refused to process it at first. A gun. At Brennan's stupid house party, a woman came down the stairs with blood on her forehead, not a lot, but enough to see, and she was crying and saying they hit her. They just hit her with something. Brennan grabbed her shoulders and asked, Who hit you? But she just kept shaking her head and trying to push past us toward the back exit. I pushed up the stairs against the flow of people. I did not care about anything except finding Paige. The living room was pure chaos when I got there. People were scrambling toward the front door and the back door, knocking over furniture, stepping on each other. I saw one of the guys from that group I had noticed earlier, the ones who had been watching the crowd, and he was standing in the middle of the room holding a black pistol, pointing it at the ceiling. He was not yelling or making threats. He was just standing there, calm, like he was waiting for the panic to do his work for him. 2 other guys were moving through the crowd, grabbing purses, yanking chains off necks, pulling wallets out of back pockets. They were fast and methodical, like they had done this before. One of them had a knife and I watched him press it against some guy's throat until the guy handed over his watch. The whole thing was coordinated. They knew exactly what they were doing. And there were more of them. I could hear shouting from the kitchen, from the hallway upstairs. This was not some random robbery. They had planned this. I found Paige in the corner of the dining room, crouched behind an overturned table with 2 other women. She was shaking so hard I could see it from across the room. I ran to her and grabbed her hand, pulling her toward the back of the house. One of the attackers saw us moving and shouted something, but there were too many people between us and him. We made it to the laundry room, which had a small window that led to the side yard. I had been to Brennan's house enough times to know this layout. The window was small, maybe 2 feet by 2 feet, but Paige was tiny and I was desperate. I boosted her up and she squeezed through, scraping her arms on the frame. I could hear footsteps behind me, heavy and fast. I tried to pull myself up, but my foot slipped on the washing machine. Paige was outside, reaching back through the window, grabbing at my shirt. I finally got enough leverage to haul myself through just as someone entered the laundry room. I fell into the bushes outside, landed on my shoulder hard enough to bruise, and then we were running. We ran between houses, through backyards, until we could not hear the screaming anymore. We ended up hiding behind a shed 3 blocks away, both of us gasping for air, Paige crying quietly into my chest. I had left my phone in the basement. She had lost her purse, remember? With her phone in it. We had nothing. I could hear fireworks going off in the distance. It was midnight, the new year had officially started, and somewhere people were celebrating while we crouched in the frozen grass trying not to make a sound. After a few minutes, I worked up the courage to peek around the shed toward the street. I could see flashing lights far away, red and blue, and I knew someone had called the police. But I also saw a car driving slowly down the street with its headlights off. I pulled back and held Paige tighter, pressing my hand over her mouth to muffle her breathing. The car passed. I do not know if it was them or just some random person, but I was not taking any chances. We stayed behind that shed for what felt like an hour but was probably 20 minutes. My fingers went numb from the cold. Paige's whole body was trembling against mine, and I could feel the wetness of blood on her arms from where the window frame had cut her. When we finally moved, we walked toward the flashing lights. The scene at Brennan's house was something I will never be able to unsee. There were ambulances, police cars, people sitting on the curb wrapped in shock blankets. I saw a guy I recognized from the basement being loaded into an ambulance on a stretcher, his face covered in blood. I saw a woman screaming at a police officer, asking where her daughter was. Brennan was sitting on the front steps of his own house with his head in his hands, surrounded by cops asking him questions. He looked up when he saw me and Paige approaching, and his face just crumpled. He started apologizing, over and over, saying he did not know. He never thought something like this would happen. A paramedic intercepted us before we could reach him, checking Paige's arms, asking if we were hurt. I told her we escaped through a window. She looked at me with this expression I cannot describe, a mix of relief and pity and something else. She told us we were lucky. 7 people had been taken to the hospital. 2 were in critical condition. One of them had been stabbed trying to protect his girlfriend. The police kept us there for hours, taking statements, asking us to describe anyone we could remember. I told them about the group of guys I had noticed earlier, the ones standing by the sliding glass door. I described the one with the pistol, white guy, maybe mid-20s, dark hair, wearing a gray hoodie under a black jacket. I described the one with the knife, taller, heavier build, beard, tattoo on his neck that I could not make out clearly. But I knew even as I was talking that it probably would not help. There had been so many people at that party, so much confusion. The attackers had blended in perfectly until the moment they decided to strike. A detective told us later that they estimated 8 to 10 people were involved, and that they had likely been at the party for over an hour before making their move, scoping out valuables, identifying exits, choosing their moment. They waited until right before midnight because they knew everyone would be distracted by the countdown. They cut the music to create panic and confusion. They were in and out in under 6 minutes. By the time the first patrol car arrived, they had vanished into the neighborhood, probably splitting up and walking calmly to cars parked blocks away. The detective said they had seen this type of thing before, organized crews that target large parties, especially around holidays when houses are full of drunk people with expensive jewelry and cash. He said they would do their best, but the reality was that these cases rarely got solved. It has been over a year now. Nobody was ever arrested. The guy who got stabbed survived but lost partial use of his left hand. Brennan sold the house 6 months later and moved to Arizona. He does not throw parties anymore. He barely talks to anyone from that night. Paige and I are still together, but she has not been to a house party since. Neither have I. We spent this past New Year's Eve at home, just the 2 of us, doors locked, curtains drawn, watching the ball drop on TV with the volume low. When midnight hit, I held her hand and we just sat there in silence. No champagne, no celebration. I keep thinking about those guys, whoever they were, and how they are probably still out there doing the same thing to other people. I think about how easily it could have been worse, how if Paige had not gone looking for her purse, she might have been in a different part of the house when it all started. How if I had not known about that laundry room window, we might not have gotten out. I do not believe in fate or destiny or any of that. But I do know that sometimes survival comes down to small, stupid decisions that you make without even thinking. We got lucky. That is the truth of it. We got lucky. And I hate that luck is the only thing that separated us from the people who did not. New Year's Eve has always been my favorite holiday. Not for the champagne or the countdown, but for that electric feeling in the air when thousands of strangers gather in one place, all sharing the same anticipation. In 2017, I had just finished my nursing degree at a community college in Wilmington, North Carolina, and my roommate Sienna convinced me we needed to celebrate properly. She had read about this waterfront event down by the Cape Fear River, where they set off fireworks right over the water, and the reflection supposedly made it look like the sky was exploding twice. We arrived around 9 that night, bundled in our thickest coats because the temperature had dropped to something brutal, the kind of cold that makes your lungs ache when you breathe too deep. The crowd was already packed tight along the riverfront, families with kids on their shoulders, couples wrapped around each other, groups of college students passing thermoses back and forth. We found a decent spot near a row of food vendors, close enough to see the barge where they would launch the fireworks, but far enough from the main stage that we could actually hear each other talk. Sienna had brought a small folding blanket, and we stood on it to keep our feet off the frozen ground, stamping in place every few minutes to keep the blood flowing. The atmosphere was incredible. All those Christmas lights still strung up along the waterfront businesses, the smell of funnel cake and hot chocolate mixing with the salty river air. I remember feeling genuinely happy that night, like everything in my life was finally clicking into place. I had a job interview lined up at a hospital for the following week. My student loans were manageable, and I was surrounded by what felt like pure celebration. Around 11, my bladder started protesting all the hot cider I had been drinking, and the nearest porta potties had lines that snaked halfway down the block. Sienna pointed toward a path that led away from the main crowd, toward some older buildings near the historic district. She said she had seen people walking that way earlier, probably toward some restaurant bathrooms. I told her I would be back in 15 minutes, 20 tops. The path was paved but narrow, cutting between 2 brick warehouses that had been converted into boutique shops, all closed for the holiday. The noise from the crowd faded faster than I expected, replaced by that hollow quiet you get in empty commercial areas at night. A few streetlights dotted the way, but they were the old kind, casting weak yellow circles that barely touched the ground between them. I passed a couple heading back toward the waterfront, the woman laughing at something on her phone, and that made me feel better about my decision to walk this way. About halfway down the path, I noticed a small courtyard to my left with benches and a dried-up fountain, the kind of space where office workers probably ate lunch during the week. I remember thinking it looked peaceful, almost pretty, with the faint glow from a string of forgotten Christmas lights wrapped around a bare tree. My legs were stiff from standing for 2 hours, so I decided to stop for just a minute, stretch my calves, roll my ankles. The fireworks were not supposed to start until midnight anyway, and I still had almost 40 minutes. I walked into the courtyard and sat on one of the benches, rubbing my hands together and blowing into them. The cold had gotten sharper away from the body heat of the crowd, and I could see my breath forming thick clouds in front of my face. I pulled out my phone to text Sienna that I might be a few extra minutes, and that was when I first heard the footsteps. They were slow and deliberate, the sound of hard-soled shoes on brick coming from somewhere behind me. I turned around but did not see anyone, just the dark mouth of an alley between 2 buildings that I had not noticed before. I figured it was probably someone else looking for a bathroom or a quiet spot, maybe someone who had drunk too much and needed to clear their head. I went back to typing my message, but my thumbs had gotten clumsy from the cold, and I kept hitting the wrong letters. The footsteps stopped. I did not think much of it at the time, just assumed whoever it was had found where they were going. But something made me look up again, some instinct I cannot really explain, and that was when I saw him standing at the edge of the courtyard, maybe 30 feet away, just outside the reach of the Christmas lights. He was tall, wearing a dark jacket with the hood pulled up, and he was completely still. Not walking, not looking at his phone, not doing any of the things a normal person does when they stop somewhere. Just standing there, facing my direction. I told myself he was probably waiting for someone, maybe texting with his head down in a way I could not see from this angle. I stood up from the bench, brushing off my coat like I had somewhere to be, and started walking back toward the path that led to the waterfront. I did not run because I felt stupid, like I was being paranoid, like I was one of those women who crosses the street when she sees a man walking behind her and then feels embarrassed when he turns out to be heading somewhere completely innocent. But I walked fast, faster than I needed to, and I kept my phone in my hand with my thumb hovering over the emergency call button. I reached the path and turned right, back toward the noise and the lights and the thousands of people who had no idea I existed. I let out a breath I did not realize I had been holding, and then I heard the footsteps again, closer this time, matching my pace. I did not turn around. I just walked faster, my boots clicking against the pavement in a rhythm that felt too loud, too obvious. The path curved slightly and I could see the glow from the waterfront up ahead, maybe 200 yards away, and I remember calculating how long it would take me to reach the crowd if I started running. 20 seconds, maybe 30. The footsteps behind me sped up. I want to be clear about something here because people always ask me this part. I did not scream. I did not yell for help. I did not do any of the things you see in movies or think you would do if you were ever in that situation. I just kept walking, my heart slamming against my ribs so hard I could feel it in my throat, telling myself that I was overreacting, that this was all in my head, that in 2 minutes I would be back with Sienna, and we would laugh about how I got spooked by some random guy who was probably just walking the same direction. The distance between us was closing. I could hear his breathing now, heavy and deliberate, and I could smell something sharp and chemical, like rubbing alcohol or hand sanitizer. I was maybe 100 yards from the crowd when he grabbed me. His hand clamped over my mouth before I could make a sound, and his other arm wrapped around my waist, lifting me off the ground like I weighed nothing. He dragged me sideways, off the path and into a narrow gap between two buildings that I had not even noticed was there. The whole thing happened in maybe 3 seconds. I tried to bite his hand, but he was wearing thick gloves, some kind of leather or synthetic material that tasted like gasoline and dirt. I kicked backward, trying to connect with his shins or his knees, but he just squeezed tighter until I could barely breathe. He threw me against a brick wall and I felt the back of my head crack against it. Not hard enough to knock me out, but hard enough that my vision went white for a second and my legs turned to water. When I could see again, he was standing in front of me, blocking the only way out. The gap between the buildings was barely wide enough for 2 people to stand side by side, and it was so dark I could only see the outline of his shape against the faint light from the path. He had something in his hand, something metallic that caught the light when he moved. I opened my mouth to scream and he hit me across the face with it, a short, brutal swing that split my lip open and sent blood spraying across my coat. The pain was extraordinary, like nothing I had ever experienced. My whole face felt like it was on fire and I could taste copper flooding my mouth, warm and thick and wrong. He hit me again, this time in the stomach, and I doubled over and fell to my knees on the frozen ground. I remember the cold seeping through my jeans. Remember thinking how strange it was that I could feel something so small when everything else hurt so much. He grabbed a fistful of my hair and yanked my head back, and that was when I finally saw his face. He had pulled his hood down, maybe because he wanted me to see him, or maybe because it had slipped during the struggle. He looked ordinary. That was the thing that struck me most. Brown hair cut short, clean-shaven, maybe in his 40s. He could have been a neighbor, a co-worker, someone you pass in the grocery store without a second glance. His eyes were completely calm, like he was doing something routine, something he had done before. He leaned close to my ear and whispered something I will never repeat, something so vile and specific that I knew in that moment he had been watching me, that this was not random, that he had chosen me out of that entire crowd and followed me and waited for his chance. I do not know what would have happened next if the fireworks had not started. The first explosion lit up the sky, and for a split second the alley was bright as daylight. Bright enough that I could see every detail of his face. The small scar above his left eyebrow. The way his nostrils flared when he breathed. The sound was deafening. A deep boom that echoed off the brick walls and seemed to shake the ground beneath us. He flinched, just barely, his grip on my hair loosening for half a second. That was all I needed. I lunged forward and sank my teeth into his forearm, biting down as hard as I could through the fabric of his jacket until I felt something give. He screamed, this high-pitched animal sound that did not match his calm face at all, and he shoved me backward. I hit the wall again, but this time I was ready for it, bracing myself with my hands. More fireworks exploded overhead, red and gold and white, and I could hear the crowd cheering in the distance, all those happy people with no idea what was happening just 200 yards away. I screamed then, finally, screamed louder than I have ever screamed in my life, a raw, tearing sound that ripped out of my throat and mixed with the explosions above us. He ran. I saw him turn and disappear down the alley, moving fast, his footsteps fading into the noise of the celebration. I tried to stand, but my legs would not cooperate, so I crawled instead, dragging myself toward the light at the end of the gap between the buildings. The fireworks kept going, one after another, painting the sky in colors I could barely see through the tears and blood streaming down my face. I made it to the path and collapsed there, half on the pavement and half on a patch of dead grass. A woman found me maybe 30 seconds later, a stranger in a bright red coat who dropped her cup of hot chocolate and started screaming for help. I remember looking up at her face, at the horror in her eyes, and thinking that I must look even worse than I felt. People surrounded me within minutes, a crowd forming the same way crowds always do when something terrible happens. Someone called 911. Someone else pressed a scarf against my face to stop the bleeding. The fireworks finale started, this massive cascade of light and sound that seemed to go on forever, and I lay there on the frozen ground watching it through the legs of strangers, thinking that this was supposed to be the start of a new year, a fresh beginning, and instead it had become the worst night of my life. The ambulance took me to New Hanover Regional Medical Center, where they stitched up my lip, treated the concussion from hitting the wall, and documented every bruise and cut on my body for the police report. Sienna arrived at the emergency room around 2 in the morning, her face swollen from crying, apologizing over and over like it was somehow her fault for pointing me toward that path. The detective who interviewed me was a woman named Lorraine Buckley, late 50s, with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun and a voice that sounded like she had seen every terrible thing a person could see and had learned to keep going anyway. She told me they had found blood in the alley that was not mine, that my bite had done real damage, and that they were running it through the system to see if they could find a match. She also told me something that made everything worse, something that kept me awake for months afterward. Security cameras from one of the waterfront businesses had captured footage of a man matching my description walking through the crowd earlier that night, stopping near groups of women, watching them, moving on when they stayed together or rejoined their friends. He had been there for hours, she said, just circling, waiting, looking for someone who would separate from the pack. I was not his first choice. I was just the one who gave him an opportunity. They caught him 11 days later. His name was Arthur Redding, 44 years old, a maintenance worker at an apartment complex about 20 miles outside the city. The DNA from the blood matched a sample in the database from an assault charge that had been plea bargained down to a misdemeanor 8 years earlier. When they searched his apartment, they found photographs of dozens of women, all taken without their knowledge at public events, concerts, festivals, parades. Some of the photos had circles drawn around certain faces, notes scrawled in the margins that the detective would not describe to me. I was in there, 3 different shots from that night, one of them taken while I was standing with Sienna near the food vendors, laughing at something on her phone. He had been watching me for at least 2 hours before I walked down that path. The trial took almost a year, and I had to testify, had to sit in that courtroom and describe every detail while he watched me from the defense table with those same calm eyes. He got 18 years. I got a scar on my lip that pulls slightly when I smile, a flinch response to loud noises that I still have not shaken, and a new rule that I follow without exception. I never leave the group. No matter how long the bathroom line is, no matter how much I need fresh air, no matter how safe a place looks, I stay where the people are, where the light is, where someone would hear me if I screamed. Because I know now what I did not know then. The monsters do not wait in dark alleys. They walk through crowds, smiling, patient, waiting for you to make one small mistake. Tessa throws the same party every year on December 31st, and I have never missed one since we became friends after college. Her apartment in Austin is small but cozy, and she always manages to pack about 40 people into a space meant for maybe 15. I got there around 8 that night, parked my car a few blocks away on a side street, and made my way through the crowd of familiar faces. Most of these people I only see once or twice a year. But there is something nice about that, like checking in on different chapters of your life. Around 11, I found myself near the kitchen talking to Craig. We had been seeing each other casually for about 6 weeks. Nothing too serious, just dinners and late-night texts and one weekend trip to San Antonio back in early December. Tessa had introduced us at a happy hour in November. He worked in real estate, had a golden retriever named Buster, and always smelled like cedar and clean laundry. Normal guy. The kind of guy your friends approve of. At least that is what I thought. The countdown happened. Everyone screamed and kissed and spilled champagne on the floor. I had maybe 3 glasses of wine spread across 4 hours, so I was perfectly fine to drive. But Craig offered me a ride anyway. He said my car would be safe on the street overnight, and he could pick me up in the morning to grab it before breakfast. It made sense. His place was only about 10 minutes from mine, and we had already been talking about getting pancakes the next day. I said yes without hesitation. That is the part that haunts me now. How easy it was to say yes to someone I thought I knew, someone my own friends had vouched for. We left Tessa's place around 12:30, and I remember her standing in the doorway waving goodbye, yelling something about brunch plans for the weekend. I waved back and smiled. I had no idea that would be the last normal moment of my entire night. Craig drove a dark blue Ford pickup, the kind with the extended cab and leather seats. I climbed into the passenger side and buckled my seatbelt while he fiddled with the radio, settling on some late-night country station playing old songs I half recognized. The first few minutes felt completely normal. We talked about the party, laughed about how drunk Tessa's neighbor had gotten, made plans for what time he would pick me up for breakfast. I live in a neighborhood called Barton Hills, about 20 minutes south of where Tessa's apartment is. The route is simple. You take Lamar Boulevard down, hang a left on Barton Springs Road, then wind through a few residential streets until you hit my place. I have made that drive 100 times. So when Craig turned right instead of left at the first major intersection, I figured he was just taking a different way. Maybe avoiding traffic from all the parties letting out. I mentioned it casually, said something like, "Hey, my place is the other direction," and he just nodded and said he knew a shortcut. 5 minutes passed and we were heading north, away from my neighborhood, deeper into parts of Austin I did not recognize at that hour. The streets were darker here, more industrial, with warehouses and empty lots instead of houses and apartment buildings. I asked him again where we were going, and this time my voice came out a little sharper than I intended. He glanced at me with this calm expression, almost amused, and told me to relax. Said he just wanted to drive around a bit, enjoy the night, maybe find a spot to watch the fireworks that were still going off in the distance. I told him I was tired and just wanted to go home. He did not respond. He just kept driving, one hand on the wheel, eyes fixed on the road ahead. That was the first moment I felt something shift inside my chest. Not panic yet, but the beginning of it, like a door creaking open in a dark room. I pulled out my phone to check the map, to see exactly where we were, and Craig reached over and put his hand on my wrist. Not hard, not violent, just firm enough to stop me. He said I did not need to do that he knew where he was going, and his voice had this edge to it that I had never heard before. I pulled my arm back and he let go, but something in his face had changed. The easy smile was gone. His jaw was tight and his eyes stayed locked on the road. I told myself to stay calm, to not escalate things, to just talk my way through this. I asked him if everything was okay, if something was wrong, trying to sound casual even though my heart was beating so hard I could feel it in my throat. He said everything was fine. He said he just wanted to spend more time with me. He said he felt like I had been distant lately, like I was pulling away, and he wanted to talk about it. The thing is, we had only been seeing each other for 6 weeks. There was nothing to pull away from. We were barely anything at all. The truck slowed down and turned onto a gravel road that led toward what looked like an old construction site. Piles of dirt, a half-built structure surrounded by chain-link fence, no lights except for the distant glow of the city behind us. I asked him to stop the car. I said it clearly, firmly, the way you are supposed to when you want someone to take you seriously. He kept driving. I said it again, louder this time, and he finally pulled over near a stack of concrete barriers. The engine stayed running. He turned to look at me, and in the dim light from the dashboard I could see something in his expression that made my stomach turn. It was not anger exactly. It was patience. Like he had been waiting for this moment, planning it, and now he was finally here. He asked me why I had not invited him to be my midnight kiss. He asked why I had spent so much time talking to other guys at the party. His voice was calm, almost curious, like he genuinely wanted to understand. But the questions themselves were insane. I had kissed him at midnight. I had barely talked to anyone else all night. I realized then that I was dealing with someone who had built an entire narrative in his head that had nothing to do with reality. Every interaction we had over the past 6 weeks was being filtered through some lens I could not see. I thought about all the times he had asked me what I was doing, who I was with when I would be free. I had thought it was just enthusiasm, just a guy who really liked me. Now those questions took on a different shape. Tried to keep my voice steady when I told him that I did not know what he was talking about, that I had been with him most of the night, that I thought we were having a good time together. He stared at me for a long moment, then shook his head slowly like I had disappointed him. He said I was lying. He said he had seen me laughing with some guy by the window around 11, seen me touch his arm, seen the way I looked at him. I remembered that conversation. It was Tessa's cousin from Houston, a guy in his 50s who was telling me about his grandkids. The whole thing lasted maybe 3 minutes. I knew I had to get out of that truck. The doors were unlocked. I could see that much from the little indicator on the panel. But we were in the middle of nowhere, and I had no idea which direction to run. My phone was still in my hand, and I thought about calling someone, but Craig was right there, watching my every move. I decided to try a different approach. I told him I was sorry if I had made him feel ignored, that I had not realized he was upset, and that maybe we could talk about it over breakfast like we planned. I was saying whatever I thought he wanted to hear, buying time, trying to figure out my next move. He seemed to soften a little. His shoulders dropped and he leaned back in his seat. He said he did not want to fight, that he just needed me to understand how much I meant to him. 6 weeks. We had known each other for 6 weeks and he was talking like we had been together for years. He reached over and touched my face, tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, and I had to force myself not to flinch. I smiled at him. I told him I understood, and then I asked if we could please just go home now because I was getting cold. He nodded and put the truck back in drive. For a few minutes I thought it was actually over, that I had managed to talk my way out of whatever that was. We pulled back onto the main road and started heading in what looked like the right direction. I could see the skyline of downtown Austin in the distance, and I focused on those lights like they were a lifeline. But then Craig started talking again, and everything got worse. He told me he had driven by my apartment a few times over the past couple weeks, just to check on me, just to make sure I was safe. He said it so casually, like it was a normal thing to do, like I should be grateful. He mentioned details, the wreath I had hung on my door for Christmas, The fact that I usually get home from work around 6:15. The blue curtains in my bedroom that I never close all the way. My whole body went rigid. I had never told him what time I got home from work. I had never invited him inside my apartment. He had only ever picked me up from the curb, and I had thought that was just because things were still new and casual between us. He kept talking, filling the silence with things he should not have known. He knew that I order Thai food every Thursday from the same place. He knew that my neighbor has a gray cat that sits on the windowsill. He knew that I had gone running in the park near my apartment last Sunday morning and stopped to stretch by the big oak tree near the entrance. Each detail landed like a punch. I was trying to keep my breathing steady, trying not to let him see how terrified I was, but inside I was screaming. This man had been watching me, not just once or twice, but consistently, methodically for weeks. Every dinner we shared, every sweet text message, every kiss goodnight, all of it had been happening alongside this other version of him, the one who sat in his truck outside my home and learned the rhythm of my life. I thought about the times I had felt a little paranoid walking to my car after dark, the nights I had double-checked my locks for no reason. Maybe there had been a reason all along. We were getting closer to my neighborhood now, and I had to make a decision. I could not let him drop me off at my apartment, not after everything he had just said, not when he already knew so much about my routine. I saw a gas station coming up on the right, one of those big ones that stays open all night with bright fluorescent lights and usually a few people filling up their tanks even at this hour. I told Craig I needed to use the bathroom, that I could not wait until we got to my place. He looked annoyed but pulled into the lot. Before he could say anything else, I unbuckled my seatbelt and got out of the truck. I walked toward the entrance at a normal pace, even though every part of me wanted to run. I pushed through the glass door and went straight to the counter where a young guy in a red vest was scrolling through his phone. I told him I needed help, that the man in the truck outside had been following me for weeks, that I was scared and needed to call someone. He looked confused at first, glanced out the window at Craig's truck idling by the pumps, then back at me. I must have looked terrified because his whole demeanor changed. He told me to go wait in the back near the storage room and handed me his phone to call the police. I stayed in that gas station for almost 2 hours. The cops came and took my statement, asked me a lot of questions about Craig, about our relationship, about what he had said in the truck. They went outside to talk to him too, and I watched through the window as he leaned against his truck with his arms crossed, looking calm and cooperative, like this was all just a big misunderstanding. One of the officers came back inside and told me that Craig had agreed to leave and that they would follow him to make sure he went home. They offered to drive me to my apartment, but I called Tessa instead, and she came to pick me up. I did not sleep that night. I sat on her couch with all the lights on, replaying every conversation I had ever had with Craig, trying to figure out what I had missed. The police said there was not much they could do unless he tried to contact me again, or showed up at my place. He never did. I moved out of that apartment 2 weeks later, changed my phone number, deleted all my social media. I still do not know why he stopped. Maybe the police visit scared him. Maybe he found someone else to watch. Sometimes I wonder if he is out there right now, parked on some dark street, learning the patterns of another woman who thinks she found a nice, normal guy through friends. That is the part that keeps me awake, knowing that it could happen again to someone else, and she would have no idea until it was too late. Celebrating my birthday on New Year's Eve sounds glamorous, until you realize every party, every countdown, every drunk stranger screaming in the street is technically part of your special day, whether you want it or not. My mom used to joke that she timed my arrival perfectly, so she would never have to throw me a separate party. Turning 26 that night felt strange because most of my college friends had already settled into mortgages and engagement announcements, while I was still renting a third-floor walk-up in a neighborhood where car alarms served as background music. I had moved to this part of the city about 8 months earlier, drawn by cheap rent and proximity to the warehouse where I worked as an inventory coordinator. The building itself was nothing special, a 1970s brick rectangle with temperamental heating and a super who always smelled like cigarettes and pine sol. But it was mine, or at least the 400 square feet of it I paid for each month. That New Year's Eve, I had no grand plans. A few beers, some leftover Chinese food, and watching the ball drop alone on my laptop while the world exploded into celebration outside my window. Around 11:30, I started hearing the first firecrackers popping in the distance, that irregular rhythm that builds as midnight approaches. My neighbors upstairs were having a party, and the bass from their speakers vibrated through my ceiling in waves I could feel in my chest. I cracked open my second beer and scrolled through my phone, watching friends post countdown videos from rooftop bars and house parties across the country. The loneliness crept in the way it always does on holidays, that quiet awareness that everyone seems to have somewhere to be, except you. By 11:50, the noise outside had grown into something almost physical. Car horns, shouting, fireworks crackling like a war zone in every direction. I walked to my window and pressed my forehead against the cold glass, watching clusters of people gather on the sidewalk below, their breath visible in the freezing air. Someone had set up a small speaker on the corner, and I could hear the tinny echo of a countdown broadcast mixing with the chaos. That was when I decided, almost on impulse, that I should go outside and watch the fireworks from the street. My building had a clear view of the city skyline where the official display would launch at midnight, and suddenly sitting alone in my apartment felt unbearable. I grabbed my jacket, a heavy canvas coat I had owned since my sophomore year of college, and shoved my keys and phone into the pockets. The hallway smelled like weed and champagne, leaking from at least 2 different apartments as I made my way down the stairs. On the second-floor landing, I passed my neighbor Ginny, a retired postal worker who spent most evenings yelling at game shows through her thin walls. She was standing in her doorway with a glass of something sparkling, and she raised it toward me with a crooked smile. "Happy New Year, sweetheart," she called out, her voice already slurred around the edges. I waved back and kept moving, feeling the anticipation building in my stomach as I got closer to the front entrance. The lobby was empty, except for a torn streamer someone had taped to the mailboxes, its silver fringe catching the flickering fluorescent light. When I pushed through the heavy glass door and stepped onto the sidewalk, the cold hit me like a slap across the face, that sharp December chill that cuts right through whatever you are wearing. But the energy outside was electric, intoxicating in a way that made me forget the temperature almost immediately. The street had transformed into something between a block party and a disaster zone. People spilled off the sidewalks and into the road, cars long since abandoned to the chaos of the night. I recognized a few faces from the building, people I had nodded to in the laundry room or passed on the stairs without ever learning their names. A group of teenagers huddled around a shopping cart filled with bottle rockets, their laughter high and sharp above the noise. Someone was setting off Roman candles from a rooftop 2 buildings down, the colored sparks arcing across the black sky like slow-motion shooting stars. Found a spot near the corner, leaning against a parked car that had already been decorated with silly string and handprints in what looked like ketchup. From here, I could see straight down the avenue toward downtown, where the first hints of the official fireworks display were beginning to glow on the horizon. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister in California, 3 hours behind, wishing me a happy birthday with a string of emojis I did not bother to decode. I typed back a quick thanks and shoved the phone away, wanting to be present for once, wanting to feel like I was part of something larger than my own small life. The countdown started somewhere behind me, a chorus of voices picking up the numbers as they dropped from 60. I joined in around 30, my breath fogging in front of my face with each shouted number. The people around me were strangers, but in that moment we were all connected by this arbitrary line in the calendar, this shared agreement that something was ending and something new was about to begin. When we hit 0, the world erupted. Fireworks exploded across the skyline in cascading bursts of gold and red and blue, their booms arriving a half-second after the light like distant thunder. Car horns blared in a deafening symphony. People screamed and hugged and kissed whoever happened to be standing closest to them. I stood there grinning like an idiot, my cheeks aching from the cold and from smiling, feeling for once like I had made the right choice by coming outside. That was when I heard the first sharp crack from somewhere to my left, distinct from the fireworks, more metallic and immediate. I turned my head instinctively but saw nothing unusual, just more people celebrating, more sparklers being waved in drunken figure eights against the darkness. The second crack came maybe 10 seconds later, followed by a third and fourth in quick succession. They sounded like they were coming from a few blocks over, maybe from one of the taller buildings on Ashford Avenue. I remember thinking it must be someone with firecrackers, the big ones that sound like small explosions when they go off. A guy standing near me, heavy-set with a beard that reached halfway down his chest, caught my eye and shrugged with a knowing grin. "Someone is really going all out tonight," he said, lifting a can of beer in a mock toast toward the sound. I laughed and nodded, though something in the back of my mind registered that the noise was different, sharper somehow, more deliberate than the random chaos of fireworks. But I pushed the thought away because it was New Year's, and I was tired of being the person who worried about everything. The official fireworks were still going strong, painting the sky in colors that reflected off the windows of every building on the block. I tilted my head back and watched, letting the spectacle wash over me, feeling the vibrations of each explosion in my ribcage like a second heartbeat. The fireworks display lasted about 15 minutes, and when the finale faded into smoke and distant cheers, the crowd on my street began to thin. Some people drifted back toward their buildings. Others migrated down the block toward a bar that had propped its doors open and was blasting music into the night. I checked my phone and saw it was 12:19. The cold was starting to seep through my jacket now that the initial excitement had worn off, and I was thinking about heading back upstairs when I heard another series of those sharp cracks, closer this time, maybe just a block or two away. I counted 5 of them in a row, evenly spaced, and then silence. A woman walking past me with a toddler asleep on her shoulder glanced in the direction of the sound, her face flickering with something that might have been concern before she kept moving. I stayed where I was, suddenly uncertain, my feet rooted to the pavement as if waiting for permission to leave. The bearded guy from earlier had wandered off, and the teenagers with the shopping cart had disappeared around a corner. The street felt emptier now, the celebration winding down into scattered pockets of noise and laughter. I was just about to turn back toward my building when I heard it. Not the crack this time, but something else entirely, a sound I will never forget as long as I live. It was a whistle, high and thin, like air being forced through a narrow pipe, and it was getting louder, getting closer, and it was coming from directly above me. I looked up on pure instinct, my neck craning back, and I saw nothing but black sky and fading wisps of firework smoke. Then something hit the ground maybe 6 feet to my right, and the impact was so violent that I felt it through the soles of my boots. The concrete sidewalk cracked, actually cracked, spiderwebbing out from a small crater that had not existed a second before. I stumbled backward, my heel catching on the curb, and I nearly fell into the street. My ears were ringing, though I did not remember hearing a sound beyond that initial whistle and the brutal smack of contact. I stared at the crater, my brain struggling to process what I was seeing. There was something embedded in the concrete, something small and metallic, glinting under the orange glow of the streetlight. I did not touch it. Some part of my brain, the part that had watched too many crime shows and read too many news articles, knew exactly what I was looking at even before I crouched down to get a closer look. It was a bullet, deformed from the impact but unmistakably a bullet, the copper jacket peeled back like the skin of a fruit. My mind raced through the physics I only half remembered from high school, something about terminal velocity and what happens when you fire a gun straight up into the air. The bullet comes back down. It always comes back down. And when it does, it is still moving fast enough to kill. I straightened up and looked around, suddenly aware of how exposed I was standing there on the open sidewalk. There were still people outside, a couple arguing softly near a parked van, a man walking his dog on the opposite side of the street, A group of college-aged kids taking a selfie in front of a fire hydrant someone had painted gold. None of them seemed to have noticed what had just happened. None of them were looking at the crater in the concrete or the piece of metal that had fallen from the sky like a tiny meteor. I wanted to scream at them, to tell them to get inside, but my voice caught in my throat and all I could do was stand there, trembling in the cold. Another whistle cut through the air, this one farther away, followed by a dull thud I felt more than heard. Then another, somewhere behind me, and the sound of glass shattering. A car alarm started wailing, adding its mechanical shriek to the dying sounds of celebration. The couple near the van stopped arguing and looked around, their faces confused, trying to locate the source of the noise. I finally found my voice, though it came out thin and cracked, not like my own at all. "Get inside," I called out to them, waving my arms like a madman. "Get inside now. Someone is shooting. The bullets are coming down." They stared at me for a moment, the woman clutching her partner's arm, and I could see them trying to decide if I was drunk or crazy or both. But something in my expression must have convinced them because they started moving toward the nearest building entrance without another word. The man with the dog had already disappeared, and the college kids were backing away from me slowly, their phones still raised, probably recording the lunatic who was ruining their New Year's video. I did not wait to explain. I turned and ran for my building, my boots pounding against the pavement, my lungs burning with cold air. Another whistle passed somewhere to my left, close enough that I swear I felt the air shift as something invisible tore through it. I hit the front door so hard that the glass rattled in its frame, and I fumbled with my keys for what felt like an eternity before the lock finally clicked open. Inside the lobby, I pressed my back against the wall and tried to catch my breath, my chest heaving, my legs shaking beneath me. Through the glass door, I could see the street I had just fled, looking deceptively peaceful now. Just a few stray pieces of confetti drifting across the asphalt. A siren started somewhere in the distance, then another, then a whole chorus of them rising and falling like a song I did not want to hear. I stayed in that lobby for almost 20 minutes, unable to make myself move, just listening to the sirens multiply and watching the occasional flash of red and blue lights sweep past the windows. At some point, Ginny from the second floor came down in her bathrobe, asking if I knew what all the commotion was about. I told her I did not know, that I had just come inside, that I was tired and going to bed. The lie came out so easily that it scared me. I did not sleep that night. I sat on my couch with every light in the apartment turned on, scrolling through local news feeds and refreshing Twitter until my eyes burned. The reports started trickling in around 2 in the morning, scattered and confused at first, then more detailed as the hours passed. Multiple people across the neighborhood had been struck by falling bullets, projectiles fired into the air during the celebration, and returned to Earth by gravity and bad luck. A teenager in critical condition 3 blocks from my building. A woman hit in the shoulder while standing on her balcony. An elderly man killed instantly in his own backyard, the bullet entering through the top of his skull, while he watched the fireworks with his grandchildren. The police were asking for witnesses, warning residents to stay indoors, confirming that this was not an isolated incident, but a pattern repeated across the city every year by people too stupid or too reckless to understand that what goes up must come down. I thought about the crater in the sidewalk 6 feet from where I had been standing, and I did the math in my head over and over until the numbers stopped meaning anything. 6 feet, the length of a tall man lying down. The distance between my birthday and my funeral. I finally fell asleep around dawn with the television still murmuring in the background, and when I woke up in the afternoon, my first thought was that I needed to go outside and see if the crater was still there, if any of it had been real. It was real. The crater was smaller than I remembered, maybe 4 inches across, but the cracks radiating out from it were unmistakable against the gray concrete. The bullet was gone, probably collected by police or picked up by some curious passerby who did not understand what they were holding. I stood there in the harsh daylight of January 1st, hungover strangers shuffling past me on their way to brunch or coffee or whatever normal people do on the first day of a new year, and I stared at that hole in the ground until my vision blurred. A sanitation truck rumbled by, collecting the debris of last night's celebration, sweeping away the confetti and the bottle rockets and the crushed beer cans as if nothing had happened. I thought about calling someone, my sister maybe, or my mom, just to hear a familiar voice and tell them that I was okay, that I had almost died, but I was okay. But I did not know how to explain it without sounding dramatic, without making it into a bigger deal than it already felt. So I just went back inside, climbed the 3 flights to my apartment, and sat on my couch in the same spot I had occupied all night. The news was still covering the story, interviewing tearful families and stern-faced officials, showing graphics of bullet trajectories and statistics about celebratory gunfire deaths. I watched it all with a strange detachment, like I was seeing something that had happened to someone else in a city I had never visited. I gave a statement to the police a few days later, after I finally worked up the courage to call the non-emergency line and report what I had seen. The officer who took my information sounded tired, like he had heard 100 versions of this same story already. He thanked me for calling and said a detective might follow up, but no one ever did. The crater stayed on the sidewalk outside my building for almost 2 months before the city finally sent someone to patch it over, leaving behind a slightly darker square of concrete that I still notice every time I walk past. I moved out of that apartment the following spring, not because of what happened exactly, but because I could not stop thinking about it every time I heard a loud noise outside my window. These days I live in a quieter part of town, a little duplex with a backyard where I can grill burgers and pretend I have my life together. I still do not go outside on New Year's Eve. When midnight approaches, I close my curtains and turn up the television loud enough to drown out the fireworks, loud enough that I cannot hear the cracks and pops that might be firecrackers and might be something else entirely. My friends think I am being paranoid, that the odds of something like that happening twice are astronomical, and they are right, statistically speaking. But statistics do not mean much when you have seen the hole a falling bullet can punch through solid concrete, when you have done the math and realized that 6 feet was the only thing standing between a new year and no years at all. Working overnight security had become my normal rhythm by that point, especially during holidays when no one else wanted the shift. That New Year's Eve found me alone in a glass and concrete office building that usually buzzed with people during the day and felt hollow after dark. I was in my early 30s, recently divorced, picking up extra overnight hours because the silence felt easier than going home to an empty apartment. The job itself was simple. Monitor cameras, do timed patrols, log anything unusual and keep the place secure until morning. Outside, the city was already alive with celebration, distant pops of fireworks leaking through the sealed windows like muted thunder. Inside, the building smelled faintly of cleaning solution and stale coffee, the kind that had been sitting on a warmer for hours. I remember thinking that if any night would be quiet, it would be this one. Everyone had somewhere better to be. The building should have been a concrete shell, nothing more. The security desk sat on the ground floor, facing a wall of monitors that showed every hallway, stairwell, and entrance. I had already done my first patrol earlier in the evening, checking each floor, tugging on locked doors, and signing off on empty rooms. Everything was exactly how it should have been. Around midnight, fireworks grew louder, their flashes reflecting briefly on the tinted windows like distant lightning. I poured myself another cup of bad coffee and joked under my breath about ringing in the new year with flickering fluorescent lights. That was when the first motion alert chimed. It came from the 5th floor, a department that had been shut down months earlier, furniture removed, lights left off. I stared at the screen, expecting the alert to clear on its own. It didn't. I switched the camera feed to full screen and leaned closer, scanning for anything obvious. The hallway looked empty, the emergency lights casting long shadows across bare carpet. A few seconds later, the feed glitched, breaking into digital blocks before cutting to black. That alone wasn't unheard of. The system was old and temperamental. What bothered me was how long it stayed dark. When the image finally returned, my chest tightened for a reason I couldn't immediately name. One of the fire doors at the end of the hall stood open. I knew for a fact it had been shut earlier, heavy and spring-loaded, the kind that slammed closed if you let go. I checked the access logs right away, expecting to see a maintenance badge or a delayed sensor error. There was nothing. No entries, no forced access, no explanation that made sense. Another alert chimed, then another, all from the same floor, all within seconds of each other. I radioed into Central Dispatch, but holiday staffing meant long hold times and distracted voices. Outside, fireworks erupted in rapid bursts. Cheering carried faintly through the walls, completely at odds with the growing tension inside the building. Every instinct told me not to leave the desk, yet policy was clear. Unexplained alerts required physical verification. I grabbed my flashlight, adjusted my vest, and logged my movement, telling myself it was probably nothing. The building felt different the moment I stepped away from the monitors. The elevator ride up was slow, each floor number lighting up longer than usual, or maybe it just felt that way. Fireworks boomed somewhere overhead, the sound traveling through the elevator shaft in dull vibrations that I felt in my teeth. When the doors opened on the 5th floor, the air smelled colder, like concrete after rain, even though the building was sealed tight. My flashlight beam caught dust floating lazily, untouched, the kind that settles only when no one's been around for a long time. The hallway matched the camera feed, empty offices, stripped walls, and that fire door still hanging open. I walked toward it carefully, shoes sticking slightly to the carpet where old adhesive hadn't been fully cleaned. Every step echoed too loudly, bouncing back at me in a way that made the space feel narrower. I pushed the fire door closed, feeling the weight of it resist before finally clicking into place. It stayed shut this time. That should have reassured me, but it didn't. As I turned back, my radio crackled with a burst of static sharp enough to make me wince. I tried calling dispatch again, but all I got was dead air, followed by distant chatter that cut off mid-sentence. The flashlight flickered once, then steadied. That's when I noticed the sound. Soft, irregular, like shoes brushing against carpet somewhere out of sight. It wasn't loud enough to pinpoint, just present enough to register. I stood still, holding my breath, listening past the fireworks and the hum of the building. The sound stopped the moment I focused on it. Another motion alert buzzed in my pocket, this one from the 7th floor. I felt a spike of irritation cut through the unease. Whatever was happening wasn't staying in one place. The stairwell was closer than the elevator, so I took it, the metal door groaning softly as I pulled it open. The stairwell smelled of rust and old paint, the fluorescent light above flickering with a tired buzz. Halfway up, the light went out entirely, plunging the space into shadow except for my flashlight. I heard something shift above me then, not footsteps exactly, more like weight settling where it hadn't been before. My radio spat another burst of static, louder this time, followed by a faint tone like an open channel that never connected. The 7th floor greeted me with a different kind of silence, the kind that presses inward instead of simply filling space. Several office doors stood ajar, their handles catching the light at odd angles. I knew those doors had been shut. I remembered checking each one earlier, out of habit more than necessity. As I stepped forward, one of the doors down the hall swung inward on its own, slow and deliberate, stopping just short of the wall. No breeze, no sound, just movement. My heart hammered hard enough that it felt like it might give me away. I backed up a step, then another, keeping the flashlight trained on the doorway, as fireworks exploded outside, bright flashes briefly strobing through the narrow windows and casting the hallway in fractured light. I didn't announce myself again. Training said to, but something about that hallway made speaking feel wrong, like it would bounce back altered. I retreated toward the stairwell, keeping my pace measured, counting steps the way I used to during patrols to stay calm. Halfway there, the light snapped off across the floor, not flickering out but cutting clean, as if switched intentionally. The emergency lights failed to come on. My flashlight beam felt too narrow all of a sudden, the edges swallowed by darkness. From somewhere close, I heard breathing that didn't match my own rhythm. It paused when I paused, resumed when I moved. Fireworks cracked outside in celebration, each burst mocking how isolated I was inside that building. I made it into the stairwell and pulled the door shut hard enough that it echoed down the concrete shaft. I didn't wait. I took the stairs two at a time, boots slamming metal, not caring how much noise I made anymore. My radio finally came alive with dispatch asking for a status update, their voice distorted and delayed. I told them I had multiple unsecured doors and possible unauthorized presence, words tumbling out faster than I meant them to. The response was calm but unhelpful, explaining that units were tied up and response time would be slow. As I descended, I heard a door above me open, followed by the scrape of something heavy dragging briefly, then stopping. I didn't look up. I kept going until my legs burned. The ground floor lights were still on, the security desk glowing like a small island of normalcy. I locked myself inside the office, sealed the door, and pulled up every camera feed at once. Several screens showed nothing but static. Others displayed hallways I no longer trusted. Doors open that should have been shut. Shadows pooled where there shouldn't have been any. One camera briefly showed a figure-shaped distortion at the end of a corridor. Not solid, more like heat rising off asphalt. Then it vanished. That was enough. I followed emergency protocol, initiated a partial lockdown and activated the building-wide alarm. The sound was deafening, a mechanical wail that cut through everything else, even the fireworks. Police arrived much later, long after the alarms had been screaming into the night. They cleared the building floor by floor while I waited outside, cold air finally grounding me in something real. Every door was found closed and locked. No signs of forced entry, no alarms triggered once they took over. The cameras showed nothing unusual after the lockdown, as if the earlier footage had never existed. I quit that job not long after, took a daytime position somewhere smaller, somewhere with people around. I still hear fireworks differently now. Every New Year's Eve, when the sky lights up and everyone cheers, I think about empty buildings and locked doors that don't stay that way, and how some places don't need people inside to feel occupied. Just before midnight on New Year's Eve, the house felt louder than usual. Not because of people inside, but because of everything happening outside. Fireworks kept popping in uneven bursts, shaking the windows and washing the rooms in quick flashes of color. I lived alone back then, renting a small place in a quiet residential area where neighbors usually knew each other by sight, not by name. That night I was staying in, pacing between the kitchen and the living room, half watching the clock and half distracted by the noise outside. Calls and messages from friends kept coming in, but I wasn't really in the mood to celebrate. There was a strange tension in the air, the kind that makes you restless without a clear reason. Every explosion outside felt closer than it should have. By the time the clock crept toward midnight, my phone was already in my hand. The call happened fast, faster than my thoughts could keep up with. I dialed emergency services with shaky fingers after hearing something slam against my back door, hard enough to rattle the frame. My voice came out rushed, uneven, trying to explain where I was and what I heard while fireworks drowned out half my words. Someone on the other end started asking questions, but another loud bang hit the door, followed by a muffled sound inside the house. Panic took over, and I moved away from the door without even realizing it. The phone slipped from my grip as I backed into the hallway. The call ended abruptly when it hit the floor, the screen going dark almost immediately. Silence inside, chaos outside. Time stretched in a way that still feels unreal when I think about it. I stayed crouched near the hallway wall, listening to every sound my house made, trying to separate normal creaks from something worse. Fireworks kept exploding, cheering voices echoed from down the street, and nobody noticed anything wrong. At some point, I heard footsteps moving through the back of the house, slow and deliberate. Cabinets opened. Something metallic scraped against the counter, then stopped. I kept my breath shallow, terrified that even the smallest noise would give me away. The smell of burned gunpowder from outside drifted in through a cracked window, mixing with the scent of spilled cleaning supplies. Every second felt borrowed. Red and blue lights eventually flashed through the front windows, barely noticeable against the fireworks still lighting up the sky. Officers knocked and announced themselves, their voices calm but firm as they entered the house. They found the back door damaged, furniture knocked over, and signs that someone had been searching for something in a hurry. One of them asked if I had made the call, and all I could do was nod, my throat too tight to speak properly. Neighbors gathered outside, confused, some still holding drinks and party hats. Many said they heard nothing unusual because the fireworks masked everything. By the time things settled, midnight had already passed, and the new year had started in the worst way I could imagine. After the officers finished their initial sweep, they sat me down on the edge of the couch that hadn't been knocked over. One of them introduced himself as Daniel, his voice steady in a way that made the room feel less unstable. He asked me to walk him through everything again, slowly this time, from the first noise to the moment the call dropped. As I talked, I noticed small details I hadn't seen before. A shallow dent in the refrigerator door, muddy footprints leading toward the laundry room, a chair pulled out like someone had used it to climb. Daniel exchanged a quick look with his partner, a woman named Lauren, and wrote something down without explaining it. They asked if anyone knew I was home alone that night. I couldn't give them a clear answer. The idea that someone might have known made the room feel smaller. They found my phone near the hallway, the screen cracked but still powered on. The emergency call log was right there, time-stamped just minutes before midnight. Lauren explained that dispatch heard shouting and background noise before the line went dead, but not enough to pinpoint exactly what was happening. That part stuck with me more than anything else. I had tried to say so much in such a short moment, and none of it landed. The officers photographed everything, even the smallest scratch, while fireworks continued outside like nothing had changed. From the front window, I could see neighbors hugging and laughing in their driveways. The contrast was surreal, like two different realities colliding on the same street. Inside my house, it felt like time had stalled. Once the police finished, they asked if I had somewhere safe to go for the night. I called a coworker named Allison, someone I trusted enough to answer at that hour. She arrived still wearing a glittery jacket, clearly pulled from a party, her face changing the second she stepped inside. Sitting in her car afterward, my hands finally started to ache from how tightly I'd been clenching them. I replayed the sounds in my head over and over, trying to make sense of what the person had been doing inside my house. Nothing obvious was missing, which somehow made it worse. It suggested the intrusion wasn't random. That thought followed me all the way to Allison's apartment, where the fireworks finally faded into distant echoes. Sleep didn't really happen that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured the back door bending inward again. Early in the morning, Daniel called to say they hadn't found anyone matching the limited description they had. No clear fingerprints either, just smudges and partial prints ruined by moisture from outside. He told me to stay alert and report anything unusual. The words sounded routine, but his tone wasn't casual. When I returned home later that day, the house felt unfamiliar, like it belonged to someone else. I cleaned up the mess slowly, stopping every few minutes to listen. The celebration debris outside was already being swept away, and people waved like nothing had happened. Inside, though, I knew that noise had hidden something real, and that realization changed how I heard the world after that night. Over the next few days, I tried to convince myself it was a one-time thing, some drunk mistake amplified by bad timing. That logic never fully settled. Small changes around the house kept catching my attention. A window latch that didn't sit the same way, a hallway light that flickered even after I replaced the bulb, the back gate left unlatched when I was certain I'd locked it. I went over my routine in my head, questioning my own memory more than once. Daniel checked in again and said there were no similar reports nearby, which should have been comforting. Instead, it made the whole situation feel isolated, like whatever happened was meant only for me. Nights became the hardest, especially when the neighborhood grew quiet again after the holidays. A week later, I found something that pushed me past denial. While moving a storage bin in the laundry room, I noticed a faint scuff mark on the wall behind it, shaped like the sole of a shoe pressed sideways. It wasn't there before, or at least I was sure it wasn't. Next to it, barely visible unless the light hit just right, were shallow scratches near the doorframe, as if someone had tested how much force it could take. I stood there longer than I should have, staring at those marks, imagining the weight behind them. That was the moment I accepted that whoever entered my house had time. They weren't rushing because of fireworks. They were moving carefully because they felt unseen. I didn't wait for another incident. That same day, I changed the locks, installed cameras, and asked a neighbor named Russell to keep an eye on the back of the house when he was home. Saying it out loud made it feel more real, less like something I could shrug off. The police report stayed open, but there were no updates, no breakthroughs. Life slowly tried to return to normal. Yet I noticed how my body reacted to sudden noises now. A dropped pan or a car door slamming outside sent a sharp jolt through me. Midnight came and went many times after that night, but I never stopped paying attention to how quiet or loud things were around me. Eventually I moved out. Not immediately, not dramatically, but with a quiet certainty that staying meant waiting for something I couldn't control. I never found out who entered my house or why that emergency call was the last thing they heard from me before midnight. Sometimes I wonder if the person heard the phone hit the floor and decided to leave, or if they simply finished what they came to do and disappeared into the noise. Fireworks don't feel festive to me anymore. They feel like cover. Even now, every New Year's Eve, I keep my phone close and my doors double-checked, knowing that the night taught me how easily celebration can hide something dangerous. That night still sits heavy in my head, even now, because everything about it started so ordinary. New Year's had just rolled over, and life felt stuck in that strange in-between phase where nothing was great but nothing was falling apart either. I'd been crashing on a friend's couch for a few weeks, juggling freelance shifts and trying to pretend I wasn't stressed about money. The party itself was loud, cramped, and already past its peak when I decided to leave. Music thumped through thin walls, spilled drinks soaked the carpet, and everyone was glued to their phones replaying fireworks videos. I said my goodbyes, got a few half-hearted "text me when you get home" responses, and stepped outside alone. The cold air hit my face hard, sharp enough to make my eyes water. I remember thinking how quiet the street felt compared to the chaos inside. Waiting for a ride seemed harmless at first. The app kept pushing the arrival time back by a few minutes over and over, like it was teasing me. I stood near the front yard gate, scrolling aimlessly, watching leftover fireworks smoke drift low across the street. That's when I noticed a man leaning near a parked sedan down the block. He wasn't doing anything obvious, just standing there, hands in his jacket pockets, head tilted slightly as if listening to something only he could hear. I glanced away, telling myself it was nothing. Plenty of people wander around after midnight on New Year's. When I checked the app again, the arrival time jumped back once more. I shifted my weight, feeling irritation creep in. When I looked up again, the man was closer, now standing near the corner under a flickering streetlight. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he lived nearby. Maybe he'd been at another party. I walked a few steps toward the corner, hoping to get better reception, pretending confidence I didn't feel. The streetlight hummed softly above me, casting uneven shadows across the sidewalk. Across the street, the man had crossed too, mirroring my movement without looking directly at me. That's when unease started to replace annoyance. His clothes stood out in a way I can't fully explain. Dark, plain, but too deliberate, like he'd chosen them to blend in anywhere. Fireworks popped faintly in the distance, a last echo of celebration fading fast. I pulled my jacket tighter and pretended to be busy on my phone, though my screen had gone dark. The silence grew thicker by the minute. One house over, a front door slammed, and a group of laughing people disappeared inside, leaving the street empty again. The man crossed back to my side of the road and stopped, no more than half a block away. He didn't check a phone, didn't smoke, didn't talk to anyone. He just stood there, facing in my direction, breathing slow and steady. The ride app buzzed with another delay, and a hot wave of frustration washed over me. I considered going back inside, but the party noise had dropped, and the porch light was off now. I took a step backward instead, heels scraping softly on concrete. The man took a step forward. No words, no rush. Just the distance between us shrinking as the last fireworks burned out overhead. My heart started pounding in a way that felt loud inside my ears, like it might give me away. I glanced down the street again, hoping to see headlights, any sign of movement that wasn't him. The road looked abandoned, bits of shredded firework paper stuck to the pavement like confetti that had lost its purpose. I shifted closer to the fence, fingers brushing cold metal, trying to look casual while my thoughts raced. The man moved again, slow and measured, stopping just past the driveway across from me. I could finally see his face clearly under the streetlight. Narrow jaw, patchy beard, eyes fixed in my direction without blinking much. He didn't look drunk, didn't look lost. That made it worse. The air felt heavier with each second, like the night itself was leaning in to watch. I cleared my throat and said a quiet hey, mostly to prove to myself I could still speak. My voice sounded thin, almost swallowed by the dark. He didn't answer. Instead, he angled his body slightly toward me, shoes scraping softly against the pavement as he closed the gap again. I checked the app one more time, hands clumsy as my fingers tapped the screen, only to see the ride had canceled entirely. A small notification popped up, bright and cruel. Panic crept in, sharp and electric, making my thoughts jump. I considered calling someone, anyone, but the idea of turning my back on him felt impossible. The street had gone completely still, no music, no voices, just the faint crackle of distant fireworks dying out. At that point, instinct took over. I started walking, not fast, keeping my pace steady as if I had somewhere definite to be. My boots echoed against the sidewalk, each step sounding too loud. Behind me, footsteps followed, matching my rhythm with unsettling precision. I didn't look back, but I didn't need to. His presence felt close enough to touch. I turned down a side street, hoping the movement might shake him off, but the footsteps turned with me. My breath came shallow, chest tight, every nerve screaming to run while my mind begged me not to. Porch lights were dark, curtains drawn, the world tucked safely away indoors. It felt like I had slipped out of reality and into something meant only for me. I stopped abruptly near a small intersection where the road widened slightly, forcing myself to turn and face him. The man halted a few steps away, close enough that I could smell cigarette smoke clinging to his jacket. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Fireworks flared weakly in the distance, briefly lighting his face in red and gold before fading again. I told him I was meeting someone, that they were just around the corner, words tumbling out awkward and fast. He tilted his head, considering me, eyes flicking past my shoulder as if measuring the lie. Then, without warning, he stepped back. Not fast, not apologetic, just retreating into the shadows. I stood there shaking, waiting to see if he'd come forward again, but he didn't. He disappeared between two houses, leaving the street empty and silent once more. I didn't move right away after he vanished. My legs felt weak, like they'd forgotten their job, and the silence rang louder than the fireworks ever had. I stood there listening for footsteps, for breathing, for anything that meant he was still nearby. Nothing came. After a long minute, I pulled out my phone and called a rideshare again, forcing my voice to stay steady while my thumb hovered over the screen. This time, I walked toward the brightest spot I could find, stopping directly under a streetlight where anyone passing would see me. The light buzzed overhead, harsh and unforgiving, but I welcomed it. I kept scanning every driveway and shadow, replaying the way he'd matched my steps. When headlights finally appeared at the far end of the street, relief hit so hard it made me dizzy. The driver pulled up and I got in fast, locking the door without even thinking about how that looked. I gave a vague greeting and stared straight ahead, watching the street in the side mirror as we pulled away. I half expected to see him step out from between the houses, chasing the car or staring after it. The mirror showed nothing but empty pavement and abandoned decorations sagging on fences. During the ride, my phone buzzed with messages from friends asking where I'd gone, but I couldn't bring myself to type out an explanation yet. My body was still buzzing, every muscle tight, like I hadn't fully escaped. The driver chatted about traffic and road closures, unaware of how close I felt to something going very wrong. I nodded along, counting the blocks until home. Once inside my place, I double-checked every lock and stood by the door longer than necessary, listening to the building settle. The quiet felt different now, sharper, less friendly. I peeled off my jacket and noticed a faint smell of smoke still clinging to it, and my chest tightened all over again. Sleep didn't come easily. Every sound from the hallway made me sit up, heart racing, convinced I'd hear footsteps stopping outside my door. Morning light eventually crept in, dull and gray, and with it came that hollow disbelief that everything had gone back to normal. The world outside looked the same, like nothing strange had happened at all. That disconnect bothered me more than the fear itself. In the days after, I replayed the night endlessly, trying to pinpoint the exact moment when coincidence turned into threat. I never saw that man again, and nothing else happened, at least not outwardly. Still, I changed how I moved through the world after that. I stopped waiting alone, even for short stretches, and trusted my instincts more than my need to be polite or calm. The celebration of a new year now carries a different weight for me, tied to empty streets and fading fireworks. I don't know what he wanted or why he backed off when he did. Maybe something interrupted him, or maybe he decided against whatever he had in mind. All I know is that I walked away unharmed, and that feels like something I don't take lightly anymore.